Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I am your host, Mark Gabberty, founder of the Content Marketing Plaza, bringing you 3 new episodes each week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. And before we jump into today's episode, let me ask you a quick question. How much would your life change if you could make 6 figures from your content? Imagine being able to quit your 9-to-5 job, do what you love for a living, and spend more time with your family. That's what we help our students do at the Content Marketing Plaza, an 8-week program that will help you build your way to 6 figures via your content. You can learn more about the Plaza by heading over to contentmarketingplaza.com, which will be in the show notes. All right, let's jump right back into the episode. Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I am your host, Mark Gabberty, the content marketing expert, bringing you 3 new episodes each week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. And if you want to really grow, one of the best ways to do that for your business is to get on as many stages as possible. This is a topic that we've covered in past episodes. But what do we do when we're actually on that stage? How do we deliver such a powerful presentation that it wows our audience, that people are lining up to talk with us after the event? If you have that question, if you want to figure out how to create these epic presentations for attendees and just for anyone who is in that audience, this episode is for you. So today's guest who will be joining us today, he is an accomplished leader in the communications industry with more than 25 years of experience with top 10 advertising agencies. He has experience in helping with building global brands, leading global teams, solving complex strategic problems, and developing world-class creative campaigns. He has developed an entirely original way of enabling people to put the focus of a presentation back to where it belongs, on the presenter. Today's guest for episode 308 of the Breakthrough Success podcast is none other than Michael Baldwin. Michael, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Michael, I'm really happy to have you on the show. And I mean, presentations, they really affect the way that people view our brands, our products. So I'm really happy to get into this. I know you really go deep into this topic in your book, Just Add Water. I'm wondering if you can give us some background on that book and just some of the methodology behind it.
Yeah, I think it came out of a love for the art form. I spent about almost 30 years as an account guy in advertising agency side, ironically, mostly on exclusively on technology accounts. And so part of the daily existence on the agency side as an account person is presenting all the time. And you also have to either enjoy presentations you're forced to see with clients or at events, or you sometimes, rarely, enjoy them. So when I got out of the business, I just realized that not only was the art form, in my opinion, kind of dying, but also there weren't a lot of great places that I could find that did a good job of teaching people how to do it. And that's mainly because I couldn't find what they call presentation skills companies or training organizations that had any background to help you at all with the content. They were almost exclusively focused on delivery. So I started my company 2011, and one of the first things I did, spent about 7 years teaching this, and over the course of 7 years, putting this book together.
I mean, it's interesting. You saw a problem, and instead of saying it's a shame that this problem exists, you really seeked out to be a problem solver and create this resource for people where resources like this were not as readily available before you came in with your book, Just Add Water. And I know we're really going to get deep into this, but before we talk about what we should do to create these powerful presentations, I'm wondering if you could give us an idea of some of the common mistakes people make that can really take away from their presentation.
Sure. I would say probably the biggest problem is presenters who don't seem to be that excited about or passionate about the content or the topic they're presenting about. That kind of kills it right off the bat. Another usually fairly common thing you'll see, just go to an event or a conference and you'll see many of them, is the sorry state of most slide craft. So whether it's PowerPoint or Keynote, most slide decks are not doing their presenter counterparts any favors. They're usually crammed with way too much information, aren't very artfully done, and don't really have a lot of immediate cognitive impact so the audience can help understand what the speaker's talking about with the aid of the slides that have been created. A third thing that happens all the time is when there's a complete disconnect between what the speaker is saying and what the audience is seeing. Because the way it wants to work is as you are listening to someone speak about something, the other half of the cognitive equation is the slides that they have. And if those slides are distracting, you ignore them, the brain ignores them and goes back to the speaker, in which case the slides are useless. Or they, in a unusual or good scenario, they reinforce with unexpected visuals what the speaker is saying. So I would say those are the three biggest. If I threw in a fourth one, that there's no crystal clear objective is what I call it. There's no one single-minded objective for a presentation that a great speaker will encapsulate in a story that illustrates that objective, so that beginning, middle, and end, if you reinforce it, the audience leaves the room knowing exactly what your main objective was.
And those are some interesting common mistakes. I think a lot of it really comes down to the clarity, not really know what we're presenting on. If we don't know what we're doing, then the audience won't know what we're doing. And even if you have an idea, you know you're going to cover all these different topics, how do they all tie in together? Because if you don't know that and you're just hitting on a bunch of different topics that you believe will provide value, your audience won't exactly know where you're taking them on the journey. And one thing you mentioned, most slide decks, they're not really doing a good enough job at helping the presenter. And I feel like you see a lot of slides that are like 100 words on a slide, these like really lengthy slides that you're not going to read all that text, or even worse, the speaker just recites what's there on the slide. So how can we have this dynamic where the slides are attention grabbing, they grab the attendees' attention, but they also help the speaker and allow the attendees to truly focus more in on the speaker?
Well, it would start. I mean, I start anyone with whether it's a C-suite client. I work with a lot of C-suite clients. It always starts with what the crystal clear objective wants to be, and the simplest way to express that is, what are you trying to convince the audience of? So that's the operative word. What are you trying to convince the audience of? That climate change is real. That single-use plastic will kill us by 2050 if we don't get it under control. That CO2 emissions are a joke, or that CO2 emissions are not a joke, and if we don't get a handle on them, we could forget about any kind of normal weather patterns on the planet, etc. So figuring that out first, and then mapping out in what I call a logic flow. My favorite medium, by the way, before anyone should ever get anywhere near a computer, my favorite is index cards, and I like to organize them. By the way, this was the genesis of PowerPoint. Someone was doing this on a table, and someone said, "Hey, maybe we could make that into a software application." That's where PowerPoint came from, although it was not called PowerPoint when Microsoft bought them. So my favorite medium is index cards for a single thought that after which comes the next salient single-minded thought, etc., until you've kind of walked your audience through in your mind the argument you're trying to make. Then the fun part begins when you've got that kind of mapped out, is matching the thought, in which case it's almost always a headline, with an unexpected visual that, combined with a headline, makes the point even more telegraphic and more memorable.
And it's interesting you mentioned the headline approach, because, 80% of us will just read a headline to get the gist of an article, maybe just skim through it or not read it at all. And the headline really affects what we read. But, you're saying just use that headline for a slide And instead of an article that we have to read, the speaker conveys the thoughts, and that headline could also be a good way for us to remember what we're supposed to say next.
Correct. It's called logic flow.
And I mean, I really do like this approach because it gets us clear on the direction of our presentation. And how do you recommend that we get all of this together? Like, what kind of research prep do you recommend, or any other stuff before we actually go into the preparation of the presentation?
I would say everything. There's an expression called mise en place in cooking, which actually is referred to in the book, which requires, if you're cooking something, to get all the ingredients measured, laid out in front of you before you start doing, putting the recipe together. Excuse me. And I recommend the exact same thing, so that in this case, my quote unquote ingredients would be the index cards, headlines filled out for each one, probably up to 3 support points for each one, indications of what, because not all of them require images, what of the index cards you want to illustrate with an image to help make the point. And when you've got all that laid out, mapped out, then you can take that to whatever you prefer. I happen to love Keynote. I also use PowerPoint. A lot of my clients use PowerPoint. But I think Keynote, for me at least, it's a lot easier and more fun to work with, particularly when it comes to adding video and imagery.
And I mean, I do want to hit on another subject which you were leading into. There's a lot of different things we can do with a slide. You mentioned adding other media. There's also animations that you can do. I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on animations, because I feel like they could add some extra level to the presentation, but they're also very easy to overdo. So I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I think you may be referring to transitions.
Yes.
Okay, excuse me. I use, I think, only 2. And the 2 I use, that's a fairly high level of discretion when it comes to animations. The 2 I use are dissolve and appear. And the reason for that is it's kind of ironic that both Keynote and PowerPoint offer the user, I mean, probably 30 plus different animations and transitions, 2D and 3D. The only problem with them is they tend to upstage the content, which you never want to do. So for me, if you stick to something as simple as a dissolve or an appear, you're letting the content be the hero, and you're not ever at risk of either upstaging the content, or, in my opinion, when you see a lot of transition-heavy presentations, to me that is a sign right off the bat of not a very sophisticated presenter.
And it's interesting you mentioned how the animations, I mean, they look really eye-appealing, especially if you get like the right ones, but again, they can really take away from the content that you're actually trying to present. So I mean, it's really great, as Michael mentioned, to focus on just those key 2 instead of really trying to come up with the most creative animation, because that could take away from the actual content. And let's say we have this presentation, we have the entire slide deck, but even a great presentation with a bad presenter, it's not going to go that far. So how can we really hone in on the presentation and really do a great job at delivering it?
Well, there's only 3 elements in any presentation universe. There's the content itself, which tends to be a slide deck, the presenter, which is you, and the audience. So those are the only 3 things you have to worry about. And as far as preparation goes, once you get it all assembled and ready to go in index card form, then you migrate it to either Keynote or PowerPoint or Prezi, depending on what you prefer to use. Then you have the other half of the equation, which is preparation and rehearsal. And you know, I had the good fortune of working with Steve Jobs from 1989 to, I knew him up until the end. And the folklore about Steve who was always such a natural on stage, that he would spend an hour rehearsing for every minute he was on stage. So I can, number one, never underestimate the importance and necessity of rehearsal, but also one of the biggest issues that comes up with a lot of clients, including C-suite clients, is that they get nervous or they tend to blank out. And the only way to turn nerves into confidence is being totally rehearsed and prepared.
And it's very fascinating, actually, that you mentioned Steve Jobs spent that much time preparing for his presentations. And, I mean, looking at someone like that, looking at successful CEOs, looking at successful public speakers, and, I mean, you see a lot of them do a really good job. And I'm wondering if you could share with us, what do you believe are some of the key habits that result in a successful public speaker?
The key habits?
Yes.
Number one, be completely and totally committed to the topic and passionate, because there's a thing called emotional contagion. If you aren't excited about it, your audience never will be. Number two, spend the time that as much as required on getting a deck, which is your kind of assistant in a presentation context, looking as good as possible. Number three, rehearse. And by that, I mean, when you see someone who's really, really good at this art form, you'll notice that there's beautiful syncopation and choreography going on between when they say something and when something appears on the screen. It's almost as if someone else was telepathically, or the presenter was telepathically advancing the slides or the builds on the slides. It's that coordinated and well rehearsed. And when that happens, you truly get an amazing, it's an entirely different experience from the audience perspective, because it's so well synchronized that cognitively you're getting visually exactly what you should be getting when you're getting exactly what you should be getting in terms of what you're hearing. And it's a combination that, again, just totally raises the bar. It's just not that common.
And I mean, really great insights right there. I mean, you have to really be committed towards your topic, as Michael mentioned. And if you are covering a topic you don't feel like you're too committed on, I would either change the topic or try to view the existing topic in a different way that allows you to build your commitment and have that level of enthusiasm for you to deliver a really great presentation. And I mean, we talked about some of the habits that work, but taking a little different approach. I'm wondering if you could share with us, what do you believe holds most people back from being able to create a great presentation and deliver when they're on the stage?
First and foremost, 100% is they're no idea, or they're muddled about what the crystal clear objective is for the presentation. So what that means is, I mean, the biggest challenge you face as a presenter, I don't care who you are, is having the audience remember anything that you said. That's the biggest challenge for any minister, any priest, any rabbi, any president at an inaugural or a State of the Union. And getting clarity on that is what a crystal clear objective will do for you, starting from the fact that if you work that out and you're very clear about what you want to convince the audience of, you can craft a story that perfectly illustrates what your objective is. So I would say that, above all, is the most important thing, because otherwise, you know, people leave the church, people leave the State of the Union address, and they can't point to one single-minded objective or point that the speaker was trying to make. So then you don't remember it.
It's very interesting you mentioned that being a big challenge, the fact that we gotta try and get people to remember what we say, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. I mean, you can emphasize certain points, for instance, but there's just so many different ways to do that. But that's definitely something to think about. And one of the things that I also want to tackle, I know you wrote your book, Just Add Water, which will be in the show notes, but I'm wondering if you could share with us 3 other books that you believe will have a positive impact on us.
In the same subject matter?
Yes.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I've got about 7 in my own library, which are 7 additional reasons why I decided to write this book, because none of them were any good, ultimately, in my opinion, because they either were way too complicated or they felt really kind of old, like really kind of old school, or just way too long. I mean, I always joke that if these authors or these books were meant to be instruction manuals for your first night of your honeymoon, we'd have no population problem whatsoever, because it's just too complicated. So I honestly couldn't recommend one. And the other reason why I felt compelled to do a book is because I couldn't find one that was really, really visual and conceptual and easy to read, so that you could actually improve your proficiency at this art form immediately. So that's why I did it in the first place.
All right, so we'll just I
would imagine you speak publicly, don't you?
Yes.
Well, you have a new best friend in this book.
So, I mean, we'll just re-emphasize Just Add Water. I'll also throw in Content Marketing Secrets in the show notes. That's my book for any content marketer out there looking to grow and monetize. Both of those books will be at markgaburi.com/E308. And before we wrap up this episode, Michael, I've asked you a few questions throughout our time together, but what do you believe is one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often?
Why? And why not?
Michael, thank you for sharing with us those great questions and all of your great insights together. If you guys want to learn more about Michael, get his book, Just Add Water, which again will be in the show notes. Michael, do you want us to go anywhere else to learn more about you and continue on the journey?
Sure. You can, by the way, you can go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon for Just Add Water. It's also in, a bunch of bookstores all over the place. And as far as learning more, you can always go to Baldwin.com to learn more about speaking, presenting, brand building, and being, executive development. I would say those two sources.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on Breakthrough Success and sharing all of your great insights with us. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Want to dominate the podcasting industry? Now you can with your free copy of my book, Podcast Domination. You'll learn how to launch, grow, and monetize your very own show. And whether you are a beginner or an expert, this book has a lot of golden nuggets for you. We'll cover the cost of producing this book. All we ask is that you cover the shipping. To get your copy, head over to markgaburi.com/PD.